There was a low point in my life and I just needed a little help. A friend told me about this friendly family who agreed to rent me a room they built in their garage until they got on my feet. I didn't mind. I made it warm and cozy. I even put a blanket up as a makeshift door for privacy and to keep the cold out. Their daughter Tracy and I became very close. The heads of our beds were separated by the garage and we would sometimes talk to each other through the paper-thin wall when our parents were asleep. It was a small 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with a garage in the front located directly across from Palmdale Mall. You walk through the front into the living room and kitchen, then to the right an open doorway to the hall, the bedroom, then the other rooms in the back. The night I was sleeping and I woke up feeling dread. I started to hear fumes and noises on the other side of the wall that I couldn't explain. At first I thought it was her TV on low and her just moving around to get comfortable, but I soon realized that I was hearing her. It sounded like she was crying almost as if into a pillow. I couldn't make out what she was saying. "No, go away, please." Then I heard a scream out my name. I ran into that house so fast that I beat her parents to her room. As I approached her open door, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It was a gray mist hovering over her bed, like a sheet, and she was lying there gripping her blankets up to her neck. The second I entered the doorway, I saw the image of a withered older man pressing his face against hers, and then it whipped its head and looked straight at me like I was intruding. Its face then twisted and grimaced at me as she screamed my name again, but louder. I could feel its hate, and then it whisked away like long strands of hair blowing in the wind, followed by a dark shadow that trailed behind and quickly dissipated. I was the first to run to her bedside, holding her tight. I rocked her in my arms, her body was shaking, and it took what seemed like forever for her to calm down enough to tell us what happened. She said she just laid down and turned the light off in a nightstand when she heard something coming from the other side of the room near the closet. Tracy said that she sat up trying to adjust her eyes when she saw what looked like a mist on the floor moving towards her bed. The room started getting colder. Tracy saw a face forming with a full body stretching out, and it started crawling up the end of her bed onto her legs. Tracy tried to move, but still she felt frozen with fear. Tracy told it no, but it just kept crawling up her body until her face was on top of hers. She said that face, he was smiling while he was choking me and taking my breath. Then she said that she screamed out my name. I don't know why her parents just blew it off. They told her it was probably a bad dream that felt real, but I believed her. They didn't see what I saw. I asked her dad the next day why they reacted like that and didn't support her fear, and he told me that he just thought she had an overactive imagination. He said that they see things all the time as well that can't be explained, but they don't freak out about it. He told me they named it Charlie. We strung white Christmas lights throughout her room afterward, and from that point on, she never slept with her lights out. A couple of months later, the weather was starting to get cold and wasn't bearable, and they were kind enough to let me sleep on a recliner in the living room that was facing the doorway to the hall. They had a baby gate in that doorway to keep their dog from going into their bedrooms at night, and I didn't mind sharing my chair. The dog kept me warm. On this particular night it was late. Everyone was in their rooms and it was quiet. The sound of the ticking clock was lulling me to sleep. I must have been knocked out for a couple of hours when I heard the gate rattle. I thought it was just her father getting a late-night cup of coffee as he had done so many times before, so I didn't even look out of my covers. Anything was, this time I didn't hear him in the kitchen. Oh well, I thought, it was probably someone going to the bathroom, so I fell back to sleep. Once again I was awakened by the gate rattling. Only this time it was louder, as if someone was intentionally trying to wake me up. The dog next to me started shaking and growling, so I peeked out from under my blanket. There he was, standing with his hands on the gate, shaking it. He shook it louder and louder, and the dog started to bark. I thought someone was going to hear all the racket and come out, but nobody did. I was alone with this thing glaring at me. His face started to morph and his mouth stretched open, but I could somewhat see through him, and in a deep guttural voice he adamantly told me to get out. I put the blanket over my head and cried okay, over and over until he disappeared. I stayed up all night watching TV, just waiting until someone woke up. He wasn't more than a few days and I was out of there. Pretty soon after that they ended up moving too, not for the same reason, but I'm glad they did. I can't tell you the backstory of the house or who that older man was. Later I worked doing maintenance and painting for the real estate company that contracted that house, and every time that it would come up for repairs I bid it off to one of the other workers. My sister was unique, very funny, special, and the most loving person, but she did have a very dark side and we all knew that. My sister was the eldest of 6, 5 girls and 1 boy. She had a spirit friend at a young age and had quite intelligent conversations with her. My mother even asked her to ask the friend things she never would have known the answer to at that age, but it floored my mother when she gave her friends a very mature response. She told me later that she felt like her friend was there because she needed her at the time, and after she grew older her friend told her it was time for her to go. She lived through the hardest of times with our mother's very abusive marriages, divorces in ever-changing locations and lifestyle. In some ways I think it made my sister feel very protective over Mom, almost borderline obsessive, doing anything in her power to get our mother's approval even if it hurt one of us. In some ways we believed she resented us for taking Mom's attention. I think she resented my brother the most for being the only boy in the family and getting all the praise that came with that role. It broke my mother's heart when we got married and moved away, so needless to say my sister wasn't too fond of his wife and made every attempt to distance our mother and his relationship with her. Then it was our second to the eldest sister because she was always getting into trouble for her attention growing up and even into adulthood, constantly stressing our mother out and myself because I was the baby of the family. My mother and I had a special bond nobody could ever break. My sister had always been a little unstable, but there was a shift. Things just changed after the house in Alexandria. I slept with Mom there, and I remember night after night she would sit on the edge of our mother's side of the bed projecting negativity and expressing delusional problems for things that hadn't even happened until Mom started to cry for her to stop. It could have been that something may have attached itself to her, but I don't know. Fast forward to the end of my sister's life. My mother passed away at the age of 87 from cancer, leaving my sister feeling alone, not wanting to live anymore. She would never take her own life, but she longed to be with our mother in the afterlife so bad. She had been suffering for a long time with her own medical issues while Mom was alive, but now she felt like there was nothing left to fight for, so if she just stopped her treatments the end would come. We all tried to bring her home with us, but she just wasn't having it. She suffered from paranoia and she wanted to stay in that cold, empty place. She would just sit there holding Mom's things, staring off in the distance like she was simply waiting. I was there one night helping, like many nights before, when she asked me to come sit close to her. She said it was very important, so I moved closer. She told me that she was worried. She was at the end of her life and she felt like she needed my forgiveness. She said that she had done things. Bad things. I told her that we have all done things we are not proud of, but she insisted what she had done was not good and it impacted many outcomes in my life. She looked very worried. She wouldn't tell me what those things were, but I am pretty sure I knew, and they didn't have an impact on my life in a negative way. She said that for many years she had felt a dark presence clouding her thoughts. She opened her hand, spread her fingers, and hovered her hand over the top right side of her head and said, "Right here." I had always felt something around her as well, but I only told my mother about my concerns. At the end of her days, she suffered greatly. I wasn't there when she passed. I was 2 states away, so one of my sisters sent me a picture of her in her final days. She was propped up in her hospital bed with her eyes wider than I had ever seen them. She stared up to the right above her head, right where she said she felt that negative dark presence. This was not just a glaze there. This looked straight up like fear. I called her and asked the nurse how long she had been staring like that, and they told me that it had been so long they started using eye drops so her eyes wouldn't dry out. What was she looking at? It holds me to this day. The night she passed it was late, so I waited until morning to tell my brother. He didn't seem surprised and asked me what time she took her last breath. He said he had a feeling, and with that I replied, "How so?" He proceeded to tell me that after we turned the light out and closed his eyes, something dark rushed at him. He said it was cold and frightening, and all of a sudden her face came to his mind and it felt like her. He just knew she had passed. Oh man, did that ever freak me out. A few days later, my eldest sister and my brother's ex-wife, who lived together, called me telling me that things crashed in their bathroom at 5 in the morning. The dog wouldn't stop growling at the top corners of the room, and asked me if I could help them cleanse their apartment, so I did. Now I'm thinking that I'm the next one on the list. But nothing happened. Almost a week goes by and I'm lying in bed. My grandchildren sleeping with me. My grandson looks up towards my bedroom door and says, "No, no, no, spooky." He was 4 at the time. I didn't even look. I told him it was all right and that the bed was covered in white lights and we were protected. I moved my hand as if I had a magic wand and was covering those like a blanket. He sat up, unlocked around and said, "Oh, thank you." I went to sleep and so did I. My son and his fiancée, on the other hand, did not go to sleep at all that night. Now I keep a very bright night light on in my room, so there was no explanation for this. I live in an old farm-style house with a loft upstairs where my son has his room. The door to the stairs goes into the kitchen facing my room. My son said that he and his fiancée came downstairs to the kitchen. They both looked toward my room to see if I was up, but in the doorway they described it as light-absorbing darkness. They both stood there in disbelief, stricken with fear, trying to see in my room. It was almost as if whatever it was couldn't get in there, but it was standing there just feet from my bed. Stayed there for a while and then went away. Later that month, my grandchildren and I drove down to my mother and sister's home to put all of their remaining belongings into storage, and that's when we were met with that same darkness that shook us to the core. It left me questioning life events from the past. Was it this thing that made her that way, and did I have a hand in changing the course now alive, or was what we saw in that house something else altogether? Hope she finds peace. I find it strange that everyone in my family in one way or another has experienced something warm and loving with my mother. A touch on the hand, a stroke on the cheek or back, followed sometimes by the smell of her perfume. But no one at all has been visited by my loving sister. It breaks my heart to think that we don't really know what is on the other side. Is she being held somewhere and we can't help her, or did she simply just move on? I hope it's the latter. Someone brought something up that made me think. I have to agree. He said, "It sounds like it lost your sister when she died. That's why it's been showing up at other family homes. I was looking for a new host, but it seems none of you were in a dark enough place for it to force an attachment." When she passed, one of my sisters stayed whispering spiritual affirmations, quietly suggesting she go into the light until she was gone, and that gave me peace. Before 2016, I lived in Palmdale, California. My sister, Honey, and my youngest daughter lived with my mother in a rented townhouse apartment in Oxford, about 2 hours away. Every week or two I made the long drive to take them shopping and clean their house because they were both disabled. My mother was my heart and my sweet sister helped raise me, so anything they needed, I was there for them. On the first floor, the kitchen was in the back with a door that opened to the backyard, then a big open space, then the living room in the front door. On the right, the bathroom and my mother's bedroom. The stairs were on the left with a half-wall railing going up the first landing. My mom was sitting in her lift recliner on the right facing the base of the stairs. One night, we were all sitting in the living room watching a show with the lights on, and my daughter was upstairs in her room. We were laughing at someone we saw on TV, and I saw something on the stairs. It darted down the steps real fast, peeking up at me, then ducked down behind the railing, followed by a cold chill that entered the living room. My mother commented that it was cold and pulled her row together. At first, I thought it was my daughter playing tricks on me, but when she didn't pop up, I felt concerned. I said, "Mama, did you see something?" because she had full sight of anything there. She said, "No, dear." I thought I did, but there's nothing there. That's what it hit me, and instinctively I knew what it was and where it came from. I ran up the stairs and burst into my daughter's room. "What did you do?" She looked at me with her eyes wide. She knew exactly what I was referring to and started apologizing. I told her to tell me what she did to bring it into this house. She proceeded to tell me that when her girlfriends were there, they thought it would be fun to summon a spirit. Then they tried to reach the father of one of her friends who passed away 2 years prior, but she said something else came through and it scared them, so they stopped and her friends ran home without even saying goodbye. Well, I was furious. How dare you play with something you don't understand? I told her that I knew she was just trying to help a friend, but for heaven's sake, I wanted her years ago never to mess around with things she didn't understand and had no control over. I was thinking that not only do I constantly worry about my family's health now, I have to worry about this. I asked if she at least closed the door and she looked at me with a blank stare. Obviously, she did not. She said they made a Ouija board out of paper and when they were done, she ripped it up and threw it away. That door had to be closed. We gathered the pieces and she called her friends. 2 of them were too scared to come back, so we had to perform the closing without them, but in the back of my head, I knew that it didn't work and it was still there hiding. At that point, there was nothing I could have done viewing the circumstances at the time. Fast forward to 2016. I had an opportunity waiting for me in Washington State, so I begged and pleaded for my mother and sister to go with me, but my sister Honey was fanatically scared of change, and although my mother desperately wanted to go with me, she couldn't leave my sister's side. I wish now I was more persistent. So I moved, reluctantly leaving them with my daughter and her now husband to take over their care. Within those 2 years, my eldest sister, Honey's health, severely declined and my mother shared with me 8 months after I moved that she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I flew and drove back and forth to be with them, and every time I showed them pretty pictures of my new life and our beautiful green surroundings, asking them to return with me, and every time, Honey said they would say that she was too apprehensive to leave and said no. In 2018, they both passed away. My mother from cancer and my sister from an existing illness, taking a big part of my heart and my soul with them. My daughter and her husband moved out, leaving all of my mother's and sister's things there. Somebody had to put their stuff into storage, and of course, it had to be me. Even though I was the youngest of 6, I felt it was my duty. I drove there with my 2 grandchildren, 8 and 4 at the time, because there was no one available to watch them for that longer time period. When we arrived, the place was in shambles. Dirty dishes and moldy food lined the counters and were piled up in the sink, and it looked like soot all over the floor. Marm and Honey's personal belongings were strewn around the house, and in my mother's room, a barricade of trash piled up all the way up to her door. In the middle of the floor in the open space was a full-length mirror I had never seen before, hanging off a wooden ladder. I just stood there and cried. I set up a clean spot in the living room for my grandson to play on his tablet, and my granddaughter wanted to help. As I was bagging things up in the kitchen, I noticed her just standing there staring into the mirror. I didn't think anything of it, but she kept standing there. Then I heard her say to me while not looking away, "Nah, can you get rid of this mirror?" I thought she wanted me to move it, but she was adamant that it had to be taken out of the house. As to why, she looked so scared, and she told me that while she was looking in the mirror she was standing alone. She couldn't see anything in the reflection around or behind her. Just darkness was all around her, and something was coming. I looked at the mirror, not that myself, and it did look very dark. Say no more, not only did I take it outside, but I smashed it into little pieces and threw it in the trash can. We decided to sleep in the living room, and it took days to even come close to being done. This was the last night and we were done. I just mopped downstairs, so I locked the doors and all the windows in the whole house, and we slept upstairs in the bedroom across from my daughter's old room. We hunkered down on some mattresses on the floor. I always left a light on in the hall. I'm reading a book online, My granddaughter had fallen asleep next to me and my grandson was on his tablet at the end of the bed. I was getting sleepy and my grandson started to yawn. He looked up from his tablet and his eyes got big, then he ran to the door shouting spooky and slammed it. Running back, he quickly got under the covers and got as close to me as he could, making me feel very uneasy. I could see movement in the hall, dimming the light around and under the door, making swirling strange shapes as if someone were pacing, followed by surges of blackness and wisps of cool air coming from the space under the door. That night was long and I felt on guard until I finally fell asleep as well, but woke up hours later and had to go to the bathroom, but I was too scared. I was waiting until daybreak, but I couldn't wait any longer. I slowly opened the door, fearing what was waiting for me on the other side. There was nothing, but I knew there was. I could feel it. I tried to be as fast as I could and I left the bathroom door open so I could hear the kids. Then I ran back, hearing a swoosh behind me. I slammed the door and lay holding the kids until daybreak. I received a call from my sister later that morning. She couldn't understand how we'd been able to stay in that house. When I asked her why, she told me that when she was there grabbing some boxes of pictures, she heard noises coming from my daughter's room upstairs. She said it was loud and she felt an evil presence, and everything inside her told her to leave, so she did. She told me that my son-in-law, for which I had no knowledge of at the time, was practicing black magic and summoning dark energy in that room. Not cool. Late that afternoon, everything was done, the kids were in the car and the car was packed. I just wanted to look in my mother's bedroom one last time where she used to sleep. These walls held so many memories. I felt like if I looked hard enough, I would see her lying where the bed had been and in my mind, telling me not to cry. As I stood in the doorway, a chill went up my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck and my arms started to rise and I could feel something closing in on me. In my ear, I felt a warm breath and heard one loud word: run. I ran out of the house so fast without even locking the door. As we were driving off, my granddaughter asked me who was standing in the window upstairs. Let me start by saying, we had a good and loving mother. She put us before anything and anyone. She sometimes worked 2 jobs to support the 6 of us. She did the best she could with what she had and what she was capable of at the time. I also know she had a personal passion for spiritual growth, the metaphysical and occult sciences. I think she was addicted to the sensation of the phenomenon. I think in some ways it opened doors to the other side. It just became a part of our lives and we happily were along for her journey. When I was 5 years old, my big toe was cut off in some bicycle spokes. My siblings were told not to put me on the back of the bike without my shoes on. I guess my sister didn't get the memo. I was the youngest of 6, 4 girls and 1 boy. I slept with my sister closest to my age, but after the accident, I couldn't be in the bed with her because I had to sleep with this thing that helped my foot stay in place. And she might have moved in her sleep and hurt me. My mother made a cozy pad with blankets and pillows next to the couch where I could safely sleep in the living room. At that time, we lived in a townhouse apartment in Hollywood, California. Had a big living room with very high ceilings. To the left was a wide arched doorway that leads to the dining room and kitchen. Across the length of the archway were rolls of film strips my mother got from her job, and they streamed down across the doorway like beads. Straight ahead was the staircase, and under the stairs in a cubbyhole was my mom's desk. To the right was a long leather couch in my bed pad. Running off the wall to the ceiling behind the couch were huge psychedelic Zodiac posters. People thought our place was groovy. It was the late 60s. We all saw little things here and there. Nothing really scary, just odd. A couple of times we heard running down the stairs while we were sitting on the couch or creaking in the hall. My sister and I saw someone who looked like our grandmother standing in our bedroom doorway for a long, long time. Just staring at us. It was too dark to see her face. My mom told me that I talked about seeing angels and how I said that I picked her before I was born because she was what I needed for my life. I might remember bits and pieces, but that was all pretty much faded away, but this didn't. My eldest sister and I were watching the late show in the living room. Her on the couch and I was on my pad. Everyone else was in bed. I must have fallen asleep, so she turned off the TV and covered me up, then went upstairs to bed herself. After a while I woke up. It was so quiet. The moonlight coming through the kitchen window was shining on the film strips hanging from the dining room archway and reflected small color images on the floor. Because of this thing holding my foot still, I couldn't move. As I was laying there with my head on my arm, my eyelids were getting so heavy I had my arms stretched out across the floor looking at the pretty colors from the film danced on my little fingers, and I noticed the change. The color reflections were moving. I looked up the archway and the strips of film were moving as a breeze hit them. I laid my head back down and watched them start to sway back and forth. Then they started swaying and syncing with each other. I didn't know to be scared. I was so young. They kept swaying, then all of a sudden they stopped. Just like that. All of them at the same time just stopped. I was very curious. I propped myself on my elbows, still lying on my back, and tilted my head. I saw a figure behind the film casting a shadow next to me. The film strips started to separate as if someone was walking through them. It was an almost human form, but it was gray with no distinctive face. It had a male's energy. I could see him as he stepped closer. I looked down and noticed that he had no feet. I looked back up at him, but instead of him across from me now, he was crouching down 2 feet from my pad on the floor in front of me. I remember wondering why he had no light coming from him. I wasn't scared at that point. I just didn't understand. I got even closer and leaned over my head. I innocently looked up at him. He was less than 2 inches from my face. I could feel his cold breath on my nose, drying my eyes to the point that tears started rolling down my cheeks, and for the first time I felt real fear. I attempted to call for my mother, but nothing came out. My heart was beating so hard and fast I could hear it. I tried to scoot my body back, but the thing holding my foot wouldn't let me. He was leaning his whole form over my little body. I began to sweat when he started making an inhuman noise. It started out sounding like radio static. A low chuckle into a high-frequency long screech. Then a pain pierced into my big toe. It felt like a long burning needle going into the bone. I went to bed with fright and I had a loud ringing in my ears. Everything started to echo and spin. I remember seeing the room flip upside down and it all turned white and I passed out. I woke up to my mother cradling me and calling out, "Baby, you're right." I guess she had a feeling, so she ran downstairs. She said that something told her to check on me. She never told me if she saw anything. There was blood coming out of my toe. The doctor said I must have ripped out the stretches in my sleep, even though I know I didn't move. My sister just recently told me after that happened our mother had the apartment blessed, and that's why I never saw that thing there again. All I know is that she never let me sleep alone in the living room. In fact, after my toe healed, I slept with my mother from that point on, and she held my foot all night. This happened around 2007. I involved myself with self-help meetings and I was there almost every day. I immersed myself in helping others and being of service. I included my daughter in those meetings and she really enjoyed all of the comfort we had there, almost like a second family. We were respected and well-loved. Well, I didn't go around telling people about my and my family's past or our paranormal experiences. I didn't want anyone to think I was weirder than I already was. One day, this lady started sharing about her house being haunted. I didn't think much. People were always jumping on the paranormal train when it could just be explained by air coming from the vents moving the curtains, or pipes rattling in the night and a very big cause and effect. My daughter, on the other hand, whispered to me that I should help her. I whispered back that she had always been a storyteller. Everyone knew that, and I thought she was just trying to get attention like so many times before and left it at that. Besides, she had always been rude to my daughter and me, despite us trying to be kind, so why would I bend over backwards and put myself out there like that? Time passed and one morning she came in a little disheveled. It was before the meeting and I was setting things up. I asked her what was going on and she just replied, "I need coffee, long nights," so I shrugged my shoulders and moved on. The meeting started and it was her turn to share. She started by telling everyone in the room that she wasn't crazy and that her house was haunted. People started to roll their eyes, but I was listening. She said it was watching her in the shower and it would move her towel, watch her sleep and sometimes shake the bed. She then said that her child didn't want to be in the crib in his bedroom and would scream all night, waking up with scratches on his face and back. Just then I looked up at my paperwork on the table in front of me and saw her face. I knew she wasn't lying. My daughter then touched my leg and whispered, "Please help her. Please remember, I'm not a self-proclaimed anything but a child." I knew what it was like to be in that situation as a small child, and even if I didn't care much for her, I can't let a child suffer. After the meeting, I pulled her aside and told her I might be able to help her, but I needed to walk through her house first to just get a feel of what we were dealing with, and she seemed happy that someone believed her. My daughter wanted so badly to go with me, but I never allowed my children to get involved in things of that nature. She was very persistent, so I figured, what could it harm? I'm just doing a walkthrough. When we arrived at the house, she greeted us at the door with tea and cookies. I stepped through the door and despite all the lights on the room seemed dark. I asked her ahead of time to make sure her air was off and all vents and windows were closed. We went from room to room and corner to corner, feeling the definite change in density and temperature. My attention kept pointing towards her bedroom wall. I asked her what was on the other side and she told me about the closet and to feel free to go into that room. As I walked through the door, I felt something inside me pulling me back. The room had pictures on the wall that were ripped, just hanging there. A barn he posted ripped in half, still stapled to the wall. Things were strewn about the room. Just then the door to the closet opened on its own and a cool breeze swept out. I didn't feel we were alone. I then backed out of that room and closed the bedroom door and asked her where her child was. She just said, "Away." We sat down on the couch and she proceeded to give us the rundown on specifically what and where things were happening in the house. As we were talking, I noticed this very large fly. It was winter. You don't normally see flies in the cold weather. It was hovering over her head for a while, then over to my daughter's head, widely avoiding me altogether. This one was on for a while until it landed on my daughter's shoulder. Just then a tuft of her hair started to rise. She brushed it down with her fingers and looked concerned, like she was thinking, "Did anyone else see that?" I don't think the lady noticed. The fly then flew up above my daughter's head, and this time a bigger amount of her hair suspended straight up. I quickly got up and excused ourselves to step out the front door and assured her that we were not leaving. She was acting a little frantic that I was taking my daughter outside with me. It was at that moment I realized that my daughter was too vulnerable and needed protection. I said a protection prayer and covered her with a white light and told us to wait in the car. When I came back, it was like she was a different person. She cleared the table where we were last sitting. I was only gone for a minute. She then informed me that everything was fine. She was sure it would all go away. And then asked her about her little son. Didn't she ask me to help because of him? She told me that he had cried too much, so we got rid of him. She said it like she was just blowing it off and it wasn't a big deal. She said that a few days prior she told the authorities that her son won't sleep in his bed and he won't stop crying, so she gave him over to Children's Services. I just stood there in shock. What the hell just happened? As I was walking to my car, she said, "Hey, bring your daughter back anytime." She didn't come to very many meetings after that, and when she did, my daughter and I avoided her like the plague. A friend told me a few years later that she saw her at social services with her kids. She told her that she moved. I didn't even know that she had more than one child. I guess she got them back. Even though on a personal level I don't care for her as an individual, and as a mother I hope they're all doing well. My name is Brandy. I'm 56 and I live in Washington now. All these years my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories, so I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime. Most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this rundown book livable house. She warned me a lot about living in this house because I have small children, and not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he'll be taken over by the evil that lives there. Now I think she's crazy. She was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home desperately. I was also thinking that I've lived through worse and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old and made of wood. The walls, ceiling, and floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area was stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California, on the corner of an acolyte of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m. and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael age 1, Annie age 4 and Ginny age 3 were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house, so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them, but I could see the bedroom door and it was closed, and I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Ginny and her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Ginny, now you know it's too early. Go back to bed," and she said, "Me up now, Mommy," in her sweet little voice. It made us both trouble, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I said, "No, baby, we're not going now, so please go back to bed." She stumped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me we'd better go put her back to bed, and I agreed. As I'm making that long walk towards her, I'm keeping eye contact. As I'm walking, I tell her, "No, baby," and once again she stumps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up," with the sweetest smile, and she tilts her head. Opal even muttered, "Ah." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands towards her, but that smile though. I got about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared. Almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal had a surprise response. "What the hell?" Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear came all over my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing for the worst, only to find my little Ginny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. He couldn't have been her. Although when settling, Opal and I didn't talk about what happened, and later at morning we all piled in the wagon and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loud coming from the inside. People were standing around in my living room, 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how these people got in, and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, what the hell would I do that? You saw me like it." We all got out of the wagon and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierced my soul even now thinking about him. The kids were scared and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my cane. Just then the music stopped and the lights went out. We opened the door and nothing. Nothing had been moved and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy I saw standing there out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping and having a good time. I usually kept the living room lights on when I knew we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize when we'd gone that long and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious. Too much spare change quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby and the two girls up the steps and into the house. And I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. "Stop!" I yelled and ran over to them. When you could hear noise, there's like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says she saw a little boy and described him to a T. But at that moment I thought it might be an intruder or something. 3 steps went up to a landing. A locked front door opened into a window screened-in porch. Then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a big stick by the landing and forged through. I burst through the door to the porch and he was there. His face with his 2 hands cupped against the glass as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy I saw standing in the corner that day. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically attached to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me, and was I projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car, and I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was and stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Let me add my thoughts here. I don't always need words to communicate with them or for them to get a message to us. They're not bound by flesh. It's important that you have an open mind and always keep your will strong. At night you could look out the French doors of the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night everyone was asleep. It was near Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards and keep up next to me and heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull next to me. It didn't hit me. This wasn't my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone, so I looked back to his reflection and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like a black and white canvas on and was wearing old jeans with roll-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and whisked to the side with a sweeter smile. At that moment I felt everything and cried. I saw images of abuse I didn't want to elaborate on, and he made me feel that the man was not his father and that he loved the comfort of our presence. So many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. The person could live and die and no one would know unless it was reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer we lived there. I feel as if you described the bedroom so you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was my full-size bed against the wall, and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the whole door and closet. Many nights we would see the lights beneath the door get blocked out as if someone was walking up to my room, just standing there, then fade away. At first we thought it was Opal going to the bathroom since it was right next to our room, but we found out later that it wasn't her because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall there was no one there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m. we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush, but when we ran in there the lid was down and the water was calm. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we could hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first we thought it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day that they both received a package from my mom full of princess stuffed toys, cups and bowls, 2 beach towels and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't there. I took them in all this by the wall and the youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I could just scarf over the lamp to dim the lights so I could still read. Now I'm sitting on my bed next to them, and as I'm reading the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't think anything of this because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I took them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them up. At this point I was feeling uneasy and the hairs on my arms were starting to rise, never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. How is this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read, intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the cover start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point, I was standing next to them and my voice started to quiver as I firmly yelled, "Stay away from my girls." I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girl's legs, and my youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grab her leg as if she was feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over the girls and screamed, "Get out and leave us alone," repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. That was the last time I slept alone in the house. I was able to get a bigger bed and we all slept together from that point on. I don't have photographic evidence, but my youngest daughter had large red marks going up her leg to her thigh. I bet you're wondering why we didn't just leave. Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped. Not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. No one thought he was capable of doing the things he did. He didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else, and was lucky to have him, and we had children together. I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I love, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This wasn't him. This was a whole other evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer we lived there. We stopped going out as a family and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. I felt trapped. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so she didn't have to hear me scream or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. Like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him though. The things he started to do were out of his character that made me feel uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, I felt it was even more intense. One such night the kids were with my mother's and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch on TV. I was mending a sock and it had been a pretty good day. I noticed the change in the atmosphere. For some reason he seemed to have gone quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to turn to the channel when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes. Those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not the person sitting next to me and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize I was this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I said I'm going to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not call my mom. It didn't like her. I noticed that while he was talking he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost like he was looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him I was only going to be there for a minute. He stared at the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a lot longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as did I at the time. He got up grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the room. I yelled out to him that I was leaving and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself I heard and mutter yes, so we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark. As we pulled up I heard the baby crying. I rushed in and his mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son and he was soaking wet and it looked like he'd been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down. The whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious and I said that I didn't. I left him with your son. She looked surprised. She didn't even know he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to play with him. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. A dim light was coming in through a crack in the blind and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. I hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy and thick like sweat. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called his name, adding, he was scaring me. I moved closer saying, why aren't you answering me? I saw he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dropped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. He was a pool of sweat at his feet and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them and his stare was fixed down. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly I wanted to run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and with a quiver of my voice I said, please Bill. Just like that he snapped out of it. He grabbed both my wrists and peeled me onto the bed behind him. He said with a loud voice, what are you doing, you freak? Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I lay there, killed up not knowing what just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring the groceries in and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went to the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back in the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that it was gone. He came back later that next morning dirty and saying something about someone getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't sad. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department and I had to bring the kids with me. After I was there and told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came in asking me questions about him because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before we could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, bawling his white up my legs, closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked if she knew anything about a little boy I'd been living there, or did someone had died, and she said, "No, this is not that." She heard I don't know where, but there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad. It was horribly abusive to him. Later the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property dead, and he found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. He'd committed suicide. I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty close to what I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and a housing truck was built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the evil that lived there.